Good morning. Welcome to our second class of Media Ethics at the College of St. Rose. Today, we will have two presentations, two recordings of presentations that I made for this class. The first one will be on Chapter 1, Ethical Decision Making, and the second video webinar will be about the case study at the end of Chapter 1. And then we will break up after that into groups of three or four, and discuss the case study using the ethical philosophies that were in the text in Chapter 1. So the agenda for this presentation is, first, why should we care about media ethics? We're all communication majors or minors in this class, and we are studying communication, and we will likely work in the communication field in some form or another. And so why should we care about media ethics from that perspective? First, as a student in this class and a student of communication and of mass media, and then as a mass media professional or a communication professional. We will talk about ethical dilemmas or decisions that are being made in the news today, and we will address some of those things. Some of those are discussed in Chapter 1 on pages 1 and 2, and then we'll talk about maybe some others, and then facing ethical dilemmas. What does that mean to face ethical dilemmas, and how do we work through those ethical dilemmas? How we will talk about ethical dilemmas in the class, and how other people are working through those ethical dilemmas. And then the foundations of ethical theory. Where does the word ethics come from, and how do we think about ethics? And then we'll talk about the gray area. It's not about right and wrong. It's not about black and white. Ethics is more of a gray area, and being consistent in our ethical thinking is what we will be focused on throughout this semester. And finally, we will discuss the ethical philosophies that are raised by Patterson, Wilkins, and Painter in Chapter 1. These are the philosophies of ethics that we will use throughout the semester as we look at case studies, as we talk about things that are happening in the news. So why should we care about ethics in the media? Again, as media scholars, as media students, as communication students, and as potential professionals in the communication industry, whether it be as journalists, as public relations professionals, as recording artists, as recording producers, as videographers, in the jobs that we have after we graduate from college. Why do we need to care about, at least understand, ethics in the media? First of all, privacy. Do we deserve it? Do we need privacy? All of us here, probably, it is most likely that all of us are on some form of social media, whether it be Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn. When we put ourselves on one of those social media platforms, we automatically give up some of our privacy. Do we know how much privacy we give up, and should we be giving up that much privacy? This is an ongoing debate with regard to Facebook in particular. Since the 2016 election, they provided out a lot of our information to researchers who provided that information to campaigns, and those campaigns used our private information to manipulate information, to spread fake news. So privacy is a major ethical concern that we will be discussing throughout the semester. The fourth estate, what is the fourth estate? Well, the fourth branch of government. The three branches are the judicial, the executive, the legislative branch of government, and the fourth estate, or the fourth branch of government, is the media. And our founding fathers amended the Constitution to include a freedom of speech, which is often interpreted as the freedom of the press, which is designed largely or originally designed to enable or to empower the mass media, the news media in particular, as the institution that would watch over our government. And the question is, 250 years later, is the media doing its job? Is it protecting the people in this democratic society, or is it a lapdog? Is it doing whatever the government wants them to do? We will be discussing that. Why do we care? Because we pay taxes, because we vote, because the government that we elect and empower make laws and rules and policies that determine our day-to-day lives, that determine how we travel, that determine what we can watch, what we can't watch. It determines how we're policed in our communities. So is the media watching our government at the local, the state, and the national level? The dissemination and manipulation of information. When we are looking or reading or viewing or listening to information on mass media platforms, it doesn't matter which mass media platform we are gathering that information from. That information is the way it is packaged, produced, and presented to us. It impacts the way we receive it, the way we perceive reality based on that information. The other question is, will the rise of online content and the fall of printed newspapers dumb down media consumers? This was this is what I listed in my in the class exercise last week as one of my most pertinent ethical concerns in the mass media today. Is we are losing printed journalists, in particular printed journalists, and we're losing newspapers. There isn't a week that goes by where we don't hear about another newspaper that either shuts doors, stops printing, stops circulation on one day of a 7-day week. And does that impact the way we know what's going on in the world? Does it dumb down media consumers? Are we less likely to understand what's happening in our government, in our communities, if we have fewer and fewer newspapers telling us what the news is of the day, what is happening around us that we don't see interpersonally? And there are other things that we come across each and every day. The way we look at YouTube and the videos that are recommended to us. Once we watch one video, there is a stream of other videos that are recommended to us. And is that the formula that underlines those recommendations, is that manipulating us in some way? All of these things are ethical dilemmas, and people who are behind these messages and these formulas are impacting the way we interact with the mass media. And so those are ethical decisions, ethical dilemmas that those producers are making. Their decisions that they're making have an ethical impact on the consumers of that media. So here are some of the ethical dilemmas in the news that are raised by Patterson and Wilkins and Painter in Chapter 1. The New York Times in 2017 chose to call President Donald Trump a liar in its news columns and editorial pages, while the National Public Radio chose not to. So these are decisions that are made by two different news organizations, and They both have an impact on the consumers of those news. So that's an ethical dilemma that required a decision by the producers of those news, and each of those producers, the publisher of the New York Times, the producers and news editors of the National Public Radio, they chose two different things. Allowing fake news to be shared on Facebook, the largest media platform in the world. Who's allowing that? Why is Facebook allowing Russian bot, the manufacturers, the Russian manufacturers of fake news to share information on Facebook and allow, even if Facebook may have known that that information was not true, that it was false information, still allow that to be shared by platform users, by Facebook users across the country and across the world. Native advertising. Do you know what native advertising is? Native advertising, if you go to the New York Post website or the Times Union website and you scroll through the regular news section, at the bottom you'll see 1, 2, 3 pictures and headlines of what looks to be news articles, but oftentimes those are sponsored news or sponsored information. So advertisers are paying for the newspapers to put this on their website. Not everybody knows that it is advertising. It looks like news, it comes across as news, but is actually paid for. So how should that be labeled? Is the news media the enemy or the friend of the people? The president has begun calling news media the enemy of the people, and this is a troubling event circumstance where the president of the United States of America is calling the free press or the press the enemy of the people, when the job of the media, as I discussed in the previous slide, is to look over or watch, be the watchdog over the government. So it sets up, when they start to call the media the enemy of the people, it sets up a dichotomy where the media is against the people and for the government. So it is something that we need to watch for. These are ethical dilemmas that they're talking about in this chapter, and there are lots of other ethical dilemmas that inevitably will come up from week to week in our class, and we will discuss those as they come up. So facing ethical dilemmas. Ethics is about more than right and wrong. This is sometimes a tough thing for the students of this class to embrace or to address or to live with, but there's in many of the questions that we will discuss in our classes, there's no right answer or wrong answer. It's more of a gray area, and it's more about what is the better of two bad choices, or what is the better of two good choices, and not a right choice or a wrong choice. There may be some of those right or wrongs, but most often when we're talking about ethical dilemmas and ethical questions, we're talking about what is a better choice or a worse choice. Do codes of ethics help? Journalists, newspapers, Public Relations Society of America, they have codes of ethics. Do these codes of ethics help? And Patterson, Wilkins, and Painter would suggest that, yes, they could be helpful, but they can't cover all potential dilemmas that a professional will face, a communication mass media professional will face in his or her daily work. They are helpful, but they don't solve all ethical dilemmas. So the goal in this class, and the goal of studying media ethics, is to achieve a consistently ethical approach to your work, to your studies as a communication scholar, a communication student, and then in your work as a communication professional, whether you're in public relations, whether you're in advertisement or marketing, whether you're a newspaper reporter, a television producer, or any other professional career that you might have after you graduate from the College of St. Rose. What is the foundation of ethical theory? This is comes from the page 5 in our textbook, A Word About Ethics. The concept of ethics comes from the Greeks, who divided the philosophical world into separate disciplines. Aesthetics was the study of the beautiful and how a person could analyze beauty without relying only on subjective evaluations. Epistemology was the study of knowing, debates about what constitutes learning and what is knowable. Ethics was the study of what is good, both for the individual and society. Interestingly, the root of the word means custom or habit, giving ethics an underlying root of behavior that is long established and beneficial to the ongoing of society. The Greeks were also concerned with the individual virtues of fortitude, justice, temperance, and wisdom, as well as with societal virtues such as freedom. So ethics is the study of what is good, both for the individual and for society. And how do we know about what is good? How did we learn about what is good in our society, in our family, in our community? Who was it that taught us good versus bad? Was it our family? Was it our parents? Was it our brothers and sisters? Was it our friend group? Was it our elementary school teachers? Was it our high school teachers, middle school teachers? How do we know what is good? Was it the mass media? Did we learn about what is good and what is bad by watching television, by reading the news, by watching movies? So it's really probably, for most of us, it's a combination of all of those things. Foundation was probably our family, and it grew out from there. So we are still interpreting what is good on a day-to-day basis. And in this class, we will talk about what is good from a scholarly, ethical, media ethics perspective. So ethical questions are a gray area. The two questions that you need to know on this is, contemporary professional ethics revolves around these two questions. What duties do I have, and to whom do I owe them? And what values are reflected by the duties I've assumed? So if you tackle an ethical dilemma, one that you face with these questions, you start to understand, you start to look at the ethical dilemma in a new way. And outside of yourself, if you're looking at an ethical decision that somebody else made in the mass media, if you ask, what duties does that person have? To whom do I think they owe those duties? And what values are reflected by the duties that person has assumed? Those are the questions that are the foundation of the ethics dilemmas that we will discuss throughout this semester. So that you need to know these two questions for any quiz that I might be giving you in the early chapters of this semester, and they will definitely be on the midterm exam. So the two questions you need to know are, what duties do I have, and to whom do I owe those duties, and what values are reflected by the duties that I've assumed. Moving from this, the other point of Patterson, Wilkinson, and Painter is that ethics is moving away from, this is the way it's always been done, or this is what my gut is telling me, right? Moving away from answering these ethical dilemmas with those questions or those answers. We're doing this because it's always been done that way, or we're doing this because that is what my gut is telling me the way we should do, to more of a, this is the way it ought to be done. So we're contemplating consequences. We're contemplating how those before us may have made a decision when faced with this type of dilemma. This is the way it ought to be done. Morals, that our authors say, come from religion, but ethics often begin when our moral principles collide. It's not about what is good or bad, but what is good or better, and what is poor or worse. So again, the gray area, it's not about what is right or wrong. It's about what is better, and when there are two good options, what is the better option? And when there are two bad options with an ethical dilemma, what is the worst one, and what is the better of two bad options? These are the ethical dimensions we will be talking about. And this is the first tool. So many of our chapters provide us a tool that will help us make ethical decisions as we face them in our professional world. Cecilia Bach wrote Lying, Moral Choice in Public and in Private Life. And she came out with Bach's model in this book, which provides us the first tool in our ethical decision-making toolbox. First, two fundamental principles of Bach's model is to have empathy for the people involved in the ethical decision that you have to make, and two, maintain social trust. Those are the two foundational principles for Bach's model. Have empathy for the people involved. So if you are a reporter, a newspaper reporter, having empathy for the subject of your news story or your investigation, and having empathy for the people who will be reading your news story, and having empathy for the people that you are quoting in your news story and any other potential stakeholders of that news story. Have empathy for them. And then finally, and also the other foundational principle is maintaining social trust. So what does that mean? As a newspaper reporter, social trust is a trust between the readers of that newspaper and the community that newspaper operates in, and the newspaper itself. So what is the newspaper designed to do? It is to tell the truth about and present the news of the day. So as long as it is doing that in a truthful and valuable way, then they are building and maintaining social trust between the people who are living in that community and reading about the news in that community. So those are the two foundational principles. Know those, and then also know the 3 steps in the Bach's model. Again, this will be on the midterm exam and a potential quiz that might come up in the first part of the semester, because it is the first tool we will use. So determine first, as a person facing this ethical dilemma, having to make an ethical decision, determine the rightness of the situation. How do we feel about the actions that we have, we must take as a result of this ethical dilemma? Seek advice. Is there another acceptable way? Find somebody else that we can talk to that knows about the situation or that has experience in similar situations, and ask about alternatives. Is there a way to do this a way that does the least harm to the people involved, or does the most good for the people involved? Discuss publicly. How will others respond? If you're a newspaper reporter, talk to the editor, talk to the subjects, talk to the folks that you talk to about the story, and how will readers respond? How will the people involved in the story respond to it after you have written it? So that's the first toolbox in our decision making. The first tool in our decision making toolbox. It's called Bach's model. Okay, so that's our tool, and now we will address the 5 ethical philosophies or philosophies of ethics that are presented by Patterson, Wilkins, and Painter in this chapter. Where do we get our views on ethics? We get them from Aristotle. Historically, Aristotle's golden mean, avoiding extremes and seeking moderation, and or what would your hero do, or what would my hero do. So that's Aristotle's golden mean. Kant's categorical imperative. I will be going over these in more detail in the next couple of slides, but this is an introduction for what we're talking about and thinking about in terms of ethical philosophies. Kant's categorical imperative. Think about do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat others as you would like them to be treated. That's the categorical imperative. And in the words categorical imperative means when you're faced with a categorical question like this, this is the imperative decision you should make. So a rational evaluation and commitment to consistency, clarity, principled evaluation. So think about the Kant as the categorical imperative is any newspaper reporter facing this decision should make this choice. Any videographer or any sound recording engineer faced with this decision in the recording studio should always do this. That's the categorical imperative. Mill's utilitarian ethics. In a word or in a phrase, utilitarianism is the greatest good for the greatest number. That's the way to remember that. And then we have pluralistic theory of values, or as I will refer to them throughout the semester, is competing values principle. What does that mean? That means we all have multiple values. When we are making decisions, when we are going throughout our day, we all value a number of different things, and we have to weigh what we value more than others. Sometimes we have competing values when we're making those decisions. How do we measure our values when we are making those decisions? And finally, in the fifth ethical philosophy is communitarianism. So what is communitarianism? It is how individual decisions impact an entire community. So a little bit deeper dive into each of these ethical philosophies. Aristotle's golden mean is virtue ethics. It is actor-based. Okay, actor-based. It means that the ethics comes from the actor itself, the ethical, and the virtue lies at the mean of two extremes. What is the mean? The mean is the middle, right? It is in the middle of two potential extreme responses to an ethical dilemma, and we should be, according to Aristotle, staying to the mean between those two extremes. Suggests that virtue flows from the act and the person. The person should know what they are doing, select the act for its own sake, and it springs from an unchanging character. So it is actor-based or character-based. So when we're talking about, or when we read news articles that are talking about the character of a presidential candidate, the ethics, the philosophy, or the lens that the writer of that piece is using is often character-based. It is looking at a presidential nominee's character. So look at it from Aristotle's view of virtue ethics. How is this person virtuous? How is this person not virtuous? The other way to look at virtue ethics or the golden mean is WWJD. What would Jesus do? Or what would your hero do in this situation? So think about the heroes in your life. Is it your mother? Is it your father? Is it your brother? Is it your sister? Is it your best friend? Is it an actor or an actress or somebody who has, that you're trying to follow their footsteps, right? You make them a mentor in your head. This is what I want to be when I grow up, and this is the way I want to be when I grow up. So when you face an ethical dilemma and you're using Aristotle's golden mean to resolve that dilemma, then you can apply the WWJD. What would Jesus do? Or what would my brother do in this situation? Or what would my mother do in this situation? And the caution here would be choose your heroes carefully, and remember to think for yourself. So even if you have a hero, but you need to attach yourself to that mentor or hero carefully so that you're not making unethical decisions based on what they would do. So the motive, again, comes from the actor. Aristotle, golden mean, virtue ethics, motive comes from the actor. Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. The rational evaluation and commitment to consistency, clarity, and principled ethics. The foundation of the categorical imperative is that the act, the decision you make in this ethical dilemma should become universal law, or could become universal law. Again, that means if you're a newspaper reporter, you're facing this dilemma. Every newspaper reporter facing this dilemma should choose to do X or should choose to do Y. It should be universal law. The individual is an end, never a means. So we should not be treating other people as a means for us getting ahead. It should be treating that individual as an end, or how can we best treat that individual or this subject matter for itself. That's the end in and of itself. It is not to win a Pulitzer Prize. It is not to get the most viewers, but it is to make this ethical choice at this time. So is where Aristotle is a golden mean, you could look at Immanuel Kant, the categorical imperative, as the golden rule. And the golden rule, as many of us know from our upbringing or from our religion or from our kindergarten, the golden rule is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So you can look at the categorical imperative as the golden rule. The motive matters, and for Kant and the categorical imperative, the motive comes from the action. So for the golden mean, for virtue ethics, for Aristotle, the motive came from the actor, the virtuous actor. For Kant, it's the action, right? So actor for Aristotle, and for Kant, it is action. So the categorical imperative is the action that a person should take when facing this dilemma. Now we go to the utilitarian principle, Stuart Mill's utilitarian principle. In a phrase, it means John Stuart Mill's utilitarian principle. In a phrase, it means the greatest good for the greatest many. That's the easiest and best way. That's the way I remember utilitarianism. It's the greatest good for the greatest many. What will provide the most happiness or the least suffering for the greatest number of people? So you base your decision when you're facing an ethical dilemma on what's going to make the most people happy. The rightness or wrongness is in the outcome or the consequence of your action. So we have to project whether our decision will make more people happy or will make more people less happy, right? Or will it reduce the suffering for the most people, or will it improve the happiness for the most people? So it's the outcome of the decision. No one's happiness, according to John Stuart Mill and the utilitarian principle, no one's happiness is more valuable than another's. Your boss's happiness is no better or more valuable than your colleagues' happiness. So utilitarian principle, one of the foundations is that we're all equal here. It promotes a universal standard, objective, and empirical process for considering the rightness or wrongness of a decision or situation. One of the negatives or challenges with utilitarian principle is it may bias outcomes or decisions to the short term. So because it's hard to predict or project the long-term impact of your decision or the long-term consequences of a decision that you might have to make, you may make a decision knowing that the short-term response or the short-term consequence to your decision is the greatest good for the greatest many. It's hard to project 5 years out or 5 weeks out or 5 days out whether or not your decision is going to have the greatest impact, the greatest good for the greatest many. The motive is the outcome or the consequence. So again, you may be tested, you probably will be tested on the motive of Aristotle being the actor, of Immanuel Kant being the action, and for utilitarianism, it is the consequence. So the actor, the action, or the consequence. All of these ethical principles or philosophies have different motivations. The fourth philosophy we'll talk about today is the pluralistic theory of value. We all have a set of values, and sometimes those values come into competition with one another when we have to make a decision about what to do in a given circumstance or given ethical dilemma. The set of values listed in the textbook are fidelity, or the implicit or explicit promise that you make, implicit or explicit. That means you have sometimes a promise as a brother or a sister or a roommate. There are implicit promises that you make to me to you as students, you to me as your professor, your roommates. So there's a fidelity. There is a promise that we will act certain ways toward each other. This is a value that we have in the way we interact with each other. Reparation, fixing a wrongful act. If we did something that we know harmed our best friend or our boyfriend or our girlfriend or our mother or our father, then we have a value in repairing that wrongful act. Gratitude, we have a value of being grateful for something that somebody did to us. So we have a value in repairing that or repaying that with some sort of action to pay back that previous act of another. Justice, the equitable distribution of happiness. Beneficence is to help out other people. Self-improvement is we can improve our condition. We have a value of improving our condition, and that's why you're here today in this class, and that's why you're here at the College of St. Rose, and that's why you're studying, because you are improving your condition, getting an education that will help you get a job in the future, and that will help you be more educated and be more thoughtful and know more things about the world in the future. That is self-improvement. We have a value of not injure others. Okay, and then the two values that Patterson, Wilkins, and Painter add to the other list of values are to tell the truth. As media professionals, we have a value of telling the truth and a value of nurturing others. So the pluralistic theory of value is that sometimes we may have to make a decision that place one value in competition with another value, and we have to weigh those values as we make our decisions. That is competing values principle, or the pluralistic theory of value. And finally, the last philosophical principle, ethical principle that we are covering in this chapter is communitarianism, confronting society-wide values. It focuses on the impact of an individual decision on the larger society or community. The foundation is a social justice, or it is the predominant moral value of the communitarianism as an ethical principle, values social justice above all other moral values. It's a focus on the self's membership in a community. The metaphor I often use when I'm teaching communitarianism, is that as a member of a team, your decision impacts more than just yourself. I'm sure we often have members of an athletic team or another team or organization in the classroom. If you are a member of an athletic team, when you know you have a game the next day, you have a choice to make the night before, whether you go out and you party with your friends or whether you stay home and get a good night's sleep and have a good meal. And the impact of your decision, if you go out and you stay out all night and partying or staying up or treating yourself not well, that impacts the way you're able to compete in the team competition the next day. So it not only impacts you as an individual, but it impacts your entire team. And so communitarianism is making a decision, or when you make a decision using the communitarian principle, you're making a decision, an individual decision, that what you're doing is what's best for the entire team, the entire family, the entire community in which you live. So how does, from a communitarian perspective, how would the communitarian decision impact the decisions of a reporter? Well, a reporter is situated within a newspaper, within a community. So the way the perspective a reporter takes about a particular story, if they're using the communitarian principle, then they will be taking a perspective that will uphold the social good, or uphold the strength of the society or the community in which they operate. So that's it for the presentation for chapter 1. We're going to take a little break now, and we're going to come back in just a moment, and we are going to talk about the how to look at a case study, which is the end of chapter 1, and hopefully you've read this for today. It is on page 20 and 21. And then we will talk about applying the ethical principles that we just talked about, we just learned about, to the case study that is on page 22 and 23, how to read a case study. And so first, cases and moral systems, why we use case studies and what they can help us with, and then applying what we're learning throughout the semester to a case study. So we'll be right back and talk about that. Thank you.